everyone. Welcome to another podcast from the Horse's Advocate. This is Doc T. Today, I'd like to talk about a little bit about physics. Now, I know you're in the barn or driving or doing something. And you're saying, look, I want to learn something about horses. And why would you want to be talking about physics? And because I love physics, because physics is everything. Physics explains lamenesses and why your horse goes lame. Physics is about forces. It's about a lot of things that apply to your horse, because your horse is exposed to something called gravity. And we all are exposed to gravity. We step on the scale and we figure out how unfair gravity has become to some of us as we get older and the weight keeps going up. And I thought what I'd try to do is have a little bit of fun with physics. I've been talking about physics and lameness in horses since probably 1979, which for many of you, it's before you were born. So how can I make physics fun? How can I apply physics to your horse? Well, let's do it in a couple of ways. Now, some of you who are sitting at home on the in front of your computer or maybe in front of your phone watching this on YouTube, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I've got a little bit of a whiteboard here that I'm going to use. And I'm going to try to explain some things, but I'm also going to be using words. So when you're mucking out your stall, you're not going to get lost. So I'm going to flip on something called screen share. And let's see if we can get this thing up. And it just takes a couple of things. I got to punch around here and get this going. But I want to start with a law called force equals mass times acceleration. And force equals mass times acceleration is really fun. So F equals ma. And if I were a computer, or pardon me, if I could have access to the equal sign in the motor vehicle department, I would get this as my license plate. I mean, it's just so much fun. Force equals mass times acceleration. And what does this mean? Well, let's look at mass. Mass is what your horse is. And that mass has an acceleration applied to it called gravity. And gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. And 9.8 meters per second squared just means that I want you to think about you accelerating in your car at an interstate, or if you don't have interstates where you live, it's when you start from zero and you apply acceleration to your car and it starts moving forward at an ever increasing speed. Well, if you took an instant of time and said, okay, how fast is your car or your horse moving right now? And say it's moving, let's just say a meter per second. And okay, how about now? 3 meters per second. Okay, how about now? 20 meters per second. Or how about now? 100 meters per second. And if you're not into the metric system, you can put in feet or miles or whatever. In your car, you're at 0 miles an hour or kilometers per hour, and you step on the accelerator, and all of a sudden you're going 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and you're blasting down the highway. That is an instant moment in time. But if you're able to take the whole time from when you started to when you ended, there would be a steady increase in speed. And that increase in speed is called acceleration. And gravity is constantly pulling you toward the earth, toward the center of the earth. Like if you jump out of an airplane, there was no wind, there was no air, you'd be falling to the earth at a rate of 9.8 meters per second per second. So let's just not sweat over that. You're still, doing your chores in the barn, and I don't want to blow your mind. But I want to flip it around. Let's say you're going at 9.8 meters per second or 50 miles an hour or whatever speed you want, and you're holding it. There's no acceleration, there's no deceleration. You're just moving forward. Now, suddenly you hit a wall. You've gone from whatever speed you're going to zero in a very rapid pace. and that's deceleration. And what happens to all masses is a mass is just existing. It's not changing. It's you flying in an airplane at 600 miles an hour across the country, and your mass isn't changing. But what happens is you're moving at a velocity that if that velocity ended in a car, in a plane, or just falling from a building onto the ground, you would be moving from a velocity of whatever to zero instantly. And that's what your force is. So if you fell from the rooftop of your house and hit the ground, it would hurt. You may not make it. You could die. But if you're on the moon and gravity is a lot less on the moon, you jump off and you might not even make it down there for 3 minutes. You might not ever make it down if you're in space where there is no gravity. And so there's no effect, but your mass hasn't changed. You're still on the roof of the moon building, or you're out in the middle of space, and there's no change to your mass. You're looking at your arms, you're looking at your legs, the mass is the same. But there's no velocity. There's no increase or decrease in velocity. You have no acceleration. Therefore, your mass now equals the force. And this is why you can lean up against your car that may weigh 2, 3, 4,000 pounds. And it's not going to hurt you because there's no increase or decrease of acceleration. But if that car is moving at any velocity, you now have acceleration. And that acceleration or deceleration is going to hit you and move you. It's no different than if a hammer comes down, your finger's there, and your finger's fine until that hammer suddenly comes to a stop with your finger between it and the ground. And even if your finger's in the air and the hammer hits it and moves your finger, it's still going to have that momentarily impact where force is going to be greater than mass because it's going to be accelerated by or multiplied by acceleration. So what does that have to do with your horse? Simple. I want you to think about me standing right in front of you, and you're standing there, and I have in my hands an anvil that every farrier has in the back of their truck. And I don't know how much that anvil weighs. It could be 50, 60, 80 pounds. It's pretty heavy. We all know it. It's made out of solid steel. It doesn't bend. It doesn't have a soft, cushiony thing. That thing is got a mass, and I'm holding it. And gravity is pulling it toward Earth. But I'm going to control that fall, and I'm going to slightly put that anvil and put it on your foot. Gently. I'm going to slowly rest it on your foot. Now, because you trust me, which I hope you will, and because you have some experience, you know that anvil isn't going to hurt you. You're going to lay it on, I'm going to lay it on your foot, and you're not going to move it because you know that you're learning something here. All right. Now the force equals the mass, and the mass is being pulled to the earth at a rate of acceleration that has been stopped. And therefore, the earth is pushing back through your foot with an equal mass. And so here on earth, this 80-pound anvil feels like 80 pounds sitting on your foot. It's not comfortable, but you get it. Now, I'm going to take this anvil and I'm going to lift it up in the air to the height that you're jumping your horse. Let's say it's 2 feet. Let's say it's 3 feet. Let's say it's a meter and 10, or whatever you want to put it in height. I'm going to raise it to that height that your horse has now jumped through the air and is over that fence. And now you're going to come down, and I'm just going to let go of the anvil and let it fall to the earth where your foot is. And you're going to move your foot. I guarantee you're going to move your foot because you now know that that force equals the mass of that anvil times the acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared, and it's going to really hurt. All right. So it really doesn't matter what we're talking about as far as meters per second squared or feet per second squared or miles per hour or whatever acceleration, deceleration. That's just confusing the issue. We all know that as long as the mass has any sort of movement and that movement suddenly stops, it's going to have an impact on the body. And we're taking a 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 pound horse or 500 kilogram horse, and we're going to loft it up into space. And then we're going to have it land on one front foot with all of its weight. Why on earth would you want to increase its mass by 100 or 200 or 300 pounds? We are adding our weight of our bodies, the weight of our saddles, and the extra weight that you believe makes your horse look good. Not an athlete full of muscle, but a good looking horse that's got a little bit extra flesh on it. And let's say you add 80 pounds of flesh to that horse. What's the difference of 80 pounds of flesh or 80 pounds of anvil that's connected to your horse and landing on top of the ground on one hoof? And right away you can say, okay, we got a problem. And this is why force equals mass times acceleration is now the most important law of physics to you as a horse owner. Now, I know a lot of you just say, well, I don't compete my horse. I don't do much with it. I don't jump things with it. I just go trail riding with it. And I get it. And that's fine. What we're talking about is sudden deceleration. And that happens when you're turning a barrel really fast, or you're leaving a starting gate, or you're jumping over a fence, or any other action where the acceleration is rapid, when it's greater than 9.8 meters per second, which is gravity, or if it's at least that and more, as you put velocity to this horse and suddenly stop it. This is where our fractures come from. This is where our strains come from. And this is why force equals mass times acceleration is so important. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about is piezoelectric, and I'm going to try and write it here. And honestly, I can't remember how to spell it. P-I-E-Z-O, electric, I think. And this is kind of fun. Okay. Have you ever looked at the bones of your horse in an x-ray, or maybe x-rays of yourself? And have you noticed that there are no steel I-beams that you have for bones, nor are there 2x4s, 2x6s, 4x4s, or any other size of fence posts? When you look at x-rays, what is so striking is all the long bones have curves to them and a thickness to them. And what's so fascinating about piezoelectric currents is that they set up how bones are made. So if you take your horse's cannon bone, for instance, and halfway between its knee and its fetlock on the front, or hock and fetlock on the back, if you cut that leg straight in half and look down on it at the bone that you're looking at, you'll see that the front of the cannon bone is thicker than the back of the cannon bone. Have you ever asked, why could that be? Why should that be? Why is that? Have you looked at the x-rays and seen the curves and the protuberances, the little buttons that you see of bones and what people call bone spurs? Now, it's not supposed to be smooth. Wherever you see a bone spur or protuberance, that's where a soft tissue is being attached to the bone. For instance, a tendon or a ligament. Tendons, by the way, attach muscle to bones, and ligaments attach bones to bones. And where they attach, there is a buildup of bone to make that attachment. So if you're mucking your stalls right now, and you've got yourself in your hands, your rake or pitchfork, I just want you to pause for a moment. And I want you to take one hand and the other hand and hold that handle, and either, with about 6, 8, 10, 12 inches between the two. And I want you to think about twisting that handle, which of course you can't do, but let's pretend you can twist it. Let's pretend you can bend it, or let's pretend you can compress it. And whenever you put those forces on the bone, which is bending, twisting, or compressing, the bone is a living part of the body, and it sets up an electrical current. And that electrical current will actually attract calcium ions. And calcium is Ca, that's the chemical formula, or pardon me, that's the element ID. And calcium has a plus charge, a double plus charge. And the piezoelectric currents attract these calciums. So it's laid down, it's attracted, and it thickens the bone. So as your bone is stressed more and more, it'll lay down more calcium according to that stress, which I think is really cool, because this is why your bones have curves to them. And if you don't use your bones, the bones lose the calcium. They're never being stressed. And a lot of older women know this, and this is why they're stressing their bones to try to attract the calcium to build the bones stronger. And this is why you have to do your work on your horses to build their strength. And speaking of strength, you always want to look at muscles and tendons and bones together as a muscle tendon bone connection. And I'll go into that in another podcast. This podcast is all about physics, and I wanted to go into one more thing. Whoops, I just changed. How did I change that? Oh, good grief. I have now, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've absolutely lost my my pen. Okay, well then let's just forget this. Let's just see if we can write something. There. Let's do this one. Okay. What do I want to say about this? Vectors. VECTOR. Vectors is a term that applies physics and math together. So a vector, I want you to think about a vector as a force applied in a direction. So now this is really important. And some of the fairs I've talked to actually understand this. But when you have a force and a direction put together, that force will bend things. I'll give you a great example. You've got a bush outside, a flower, even a small tree that's standing there, and a wind comes along and applies a force in one direction, and that tree or that plant bends. All right, that's a force being applied to a direction and causing a movement. Another way to think about it is, let's take a hoof pick. If you all have a hoof pick, I just want you to hold it up in the air and then just let go of it and let it fall to earth. All right, that is going to be a vector that is straight down. And that vector means that you've got a mass and you've got an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared, but you also have a direction toward the center of Earth. And so you now have a force and a direction. So if you let go of that hoof pick, it's going to fall straight to the ground right below where you let it go. But now I want you to throw it with all your force straight toward the stall wall. You don't have to do this, but I mean, imagine doing this. And you throw it with such strength that it can go right from where your hand was in a direction toward the wall, and it hits the wall perfectly, right at the same height that you let go of it. Bang, it happens. But what's really interesting is in math, you can actually add vectors. So if you have a downward force and you have a forward force, just like you were throwing that hoof pick straight toward the wall, and you didn't apply a lot of velocity to that forward force. So gravity's working, and now you throw it with less force than you did before. You kind of give it a push and a shove, and it's going to go in the direction toward the wall plus the direction of gravity. And it actually is going to make, I lost my pencil again. I don't know why it does this. I mean, I do know why, but that's okay. It creates a direction that goes from where you let go of the hoof pick, and it's going to move forward away from your body, but it's also going to go down due to gravity, and it's going to land 3 or 4 or 5 feet away from you, depending on how much push you put. Now, if you know anything about archery or cannons or throwing a ball to somebody, you're going to throw enough speed to get it to the person, but you're going to account for gravity pulling it to the ground. So the ball falls right to their feet. Or the archery, you arch the arrow up and then have it come down so it hits the bullseye because gravity is going to be working on it. Artillery is the same way. You have to shoot it, and the bullet or the shell is going to continue to go, but gravity is going to take it to earth at some point. And if you shoot it up in the air and have it arch, then come down, and if your math is right, it's going to land right where it is. Okay, so what does vectors have to do with your horse? Most horses, when you stand them square on a flat surface and you look at them, most horses' hooves, here's the ground. Most horses' hooves, when you look at them, have a vertical wall and they have a splayed wall. And most horses, when you look at the inside wall, is more vertical than the outside wall. It splays out. And the reason for that is because not only is the horse's weight coming down on the horse, but because it's landing on the inside heel first, it has another component that's going to move it to the outside. And I'm going to do a whole webinar on this whole idea of vectors and how they move the hoof and how they move the legs and how they move and shape your body. Because if we were just machines and we had a force applied in one direction, we could build a machine that could take that force and continue to apply it in a way that's not going to hurt us. But the problem with living, breathing animals, including horses with these hard hooves, is that when their hooves are not balanced, when one side of the hoof is going to land on the earth moments before the other side of it lands, that downward weight is then shunted to the side, and it creates this flared thing, this flared wall. It pushes it to the outside. And that's why the outer edge of most horse feet is not as vertical as the inner edge when you look straight on the horse's hoof. That's all because of vectors. So all I want to say is I have basically, I'm going to stop sharing screen here because this could be annoying. Here we go. What I'm trying to say to you is this. Your horse lives by the laws of physics, and we can't ignore them. We have to understand that when you raise your horse up off the ground and you ask it to land on something hard called the earth, you're applying a force to those limbs that's in excess of them just standing there. And through training, you can actually build this resistance to these forces. And that's why training is so important. And we use this principle called piezoelectric currents that help set up and strengthen the bone and the attachments of the tendons and ligaments to the bones, because the stress is creating these currents. And the more stress you put on the bones, the more attachments and strength they will have to support the activity that you've got. And finally, with the help of your farrier, you're going to create vectors that are in the best interest of your horse and don't go against the way the bones are set up or the horse is made. So you aren't stressing the structures with these sideways and lateral forces. And I don't want to confuse you here on vector analysis, because I just use two-dimensional vector analysis. And there's really a three-dimensional. And if you've ever walked behind your horse, if you've had somebody lead the horse and you're behind them, just watch their hocks, and you're going to see their foot land and their hocks just jiggle sideways as you have rotation that occurs. And every horse that does any barrel racing or cutting or rapid turning, they know they're planting and they're twisting the body on that limb, and you're putting rotational vector forces on that limb that need to be supported. And this is why training is so important, and why I believe in what I call LSD training. And LSD, some of you might know as, some psychedelic drug from the past, but it'll help you remember long, slow distance. And with long, slow distance, you can actually build up these piezoelectric currents and these force vectors to have the horse respond to what you want done, so the structures don't break down. So that's it in a nutshell. I decided I'd just do fun with physics. I think that's what I'm going to call this podcast, Fun with Physics, and how it affects your horse. Force equals mass times acceleration, piezoelectric currents, and vectors, and how they affect the shape of your hoof and the strength of your bones and all the muscles and tendons in there. So I hope you enjoyed this and didn't freak out. I hope it made your travels faster, your mucking a little bit quicker. But that's it. So thanks. Hope to see you guys in the next go round. Bye.
Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There are two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.